By Christmas, I'll be sipping champagne in Tuscany with your money, he said, like he wasn't already picturing the champagne flute in my hand. It was the kind of arrogance that makes your blood run cold. Not because it was new, but because I'd heard that exact tone for months, like a song stuck on repeat. Casual contempt, rehearsed superiority. You're too stupid to even see what's coming, he told me once in our kitchen, while he chopped an apple and smiled as if he was describing a weather forecast. I'm going to take you for everything you've got. He said it like a promise. He said it like he already owned what he wanted. I sat there across from him and felt something happen in my chest that I still can't describe. It wasn't a heartbreak exactly. It was a decision forming all at once. Like a plan in a chess game, I suddenly remembered how to play. You ever been so sure someone can't hurt you because you've convinced yourself you're smarter? What would you do if the person who promised forever had spent 2 years building a secret life under your roof? We lived in Bellevue, $12 million house, maple floors, the Tesla in the driveway with the baby seats still in it, even though we only had the dog. He, David, ran a tech firm that had grown fast. The company was recently valued at $847 million in a round he'd gushed about at dinner parties. To the outside world, we were the modern American success story. Aspen weekends, Armani suits for him, Pilates classes for me, and nice dinners at that restaurant on Queen Anne. I found out he was cheating on a Sunday afternoon. Exactly the kind of banal time frame that makes betrayal feel like an infection you didn't see coming. You're literally lying to me, I said, shaking with the kind of fury you can't fake. David didn't look up from his laptop. You're being dramatic. You're in love with someone else, I said. Ring footage I culled from my neighbor's system because I had been suspicious for months had shown his car, a black Tesla, in front of a woman named Lisa's townhouse at 2:18 a.m. for a week straight. He closed the laptop with exaggerated patience. So what? A late-night coffee. You're paranoid. He smiled that same smile. He's got connections, he added in that throwaway tone, like it was fact. Her husband's a judge. Imagine if he decided to help me in a divorce. You'd be sorry. That line landed differently than anything else. I felt the floor tilt. Her husband is a judge? I repeated, not asking as a question, but as a kind of test. Yeah, County Court, Pierce. Alan Pierce, he said because he wanted me to hear the name. Top of the bench. He owes favors. This is how the world works. For 2 years he'd been transferring money, paying consultants, opening shell companies, and slipping cash into Lisa's account under the guise of startup advisor fees. I had found bank transfers, small at first, $3,000 here, $5,000 there, then a wire for $75,000 under a company with a meaningless name. There were 47 deleted messages that cloud backup saved, texts I'd only see later, each one a breadcrumb trail of promises and plans, and the single phrase repeated over and over, "He'll never figure it out." But I had no idea how to move. My prenup covered some things but not everything, and I wasn't naive. Lawyers were expensive, and in divorce court, connections mattered. He'd said as much. By Christmas, he'd said, we'll have this wrapped. He practically told me my future in advance. Little did he know I already had 2 things he had not accounted for: obsessive patience and a very good lawyer. Margaret Chen is the best, my friend Sam said when I told him I'd retained her. We were at a diner that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and hope. She's been practicing family law in Seattle for 30 years. If anyone's going to take a judge down a peg, it's her. Also, you have screenshots, receipts, and a ring clip. You have more than people think. But the judge, the husband? I asked. If the judge is Alan Pierce and he's Lisa's husband, won't he just recuse himself and the story die? Sam shook his head. Not if there's smoke. Judges are supposed to recuse when there's a conflict, but if he lies about the relationship, or if there's money, that's a different problem. You won't believe what I found next. What happened next felt like a spiral into puzzle pieces. I sent Margaret everything. The ring clips, the bank statements, a picture of Lisa standing on my front stoop, waving at David through my kitchen window. Margaret looked at the packets, the screenshots, the texts recovered by a recovery firm, and then she smiled a small, predatory smile. "This is the most sophisticated asset protection I've seen in 30 years, she said. He didn't just hide money, he baked a maze. But every maze has an exit." "What's our exit?" I asked. She tapped the printouts. "Conflict of interest, public record searches, judicial disclosures, money trail through an LLC in Delaware. We put pressure on the system where it actually exists. Paperwork. Judges love secrecy, but they hate paperwork that smells like scandal." For 2 months, we worked like undercover archivists. We called in favors. We hired a forensic accountant named Lewis, who used to work for an audit firm in Seattle. He said, "You'd be surprised how often consulting fees are just a euphemism." He pulled corporate filings, bank statements, wire transfers, and found patterns. Transfers from David's business to a consulting firm, then from that consulting firm to an account registered in Lisa's name, then a loan to an LLC whose registered agent was a small law firm that incidentally had done pro bono filings for Judge Pierce's re-election campaign. "That's 3 degrees of separation," Margaret said, circling a graph on a legal pad. "But it's contact. It's undeniable contact if we can show the timing and the intent." During this time, the first moment when everything almost fell apart came when my phone was stolen. I was on the ferry to Seattle, and in a 5-minute lapse of the platform, I realized I'd left it on the bench. A stranger had picked it up. For a hot, terrifying hour, the private investigator called me on a burner to say, "Your messages and some of the footage, gone, might be wiped. They could find a way to make it disappear." I felt nauseous. For the first time, I thought I might be outmaneuvered. But this was one of the 3 times the plan almost failed. We had backups. Cloud recovery saved the deleted files. The forensic team restored 47 deleted messages that showed not just flirtation, but planning. "He'll never figure it out. The judge will help if needed. By Christmas." No, they didn't all say those exact words, but enough did. Enough to prove intent. The second near failure was when the judge, Alan Pierce, was assigned the domestic relations calendar for King County. That same week, Margaret filed standard divorce papers. It was the most galling coincidence of a man who thought he controlled the narrative. Margaret's jaw tightened when she saw the scheduling notice. "He gets everything assigned to him," she said softly. "That's how he rules. He handles high-value divorces quietly. He has a way of making things go away administratively." I remember thinking, if he presigns over our case, then David has already won. But then something else happened. Luis, the accountant, discovered a banking oddity, a wire of $60,000 from Judge Pierce's campaign account to a consultancy in Florida, the same consultancy that acted as a pass-through for Lisa's account. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Campaign funds don't go to consultancies like that without purpose. This looks like lavishing favors. We filed a motion for judicial recusal based on undisclosed conflicts and a motion for a special master to audit asset transfers. We also quietly fed a tip to a reporter at the Seattle Times, knowing that one public story could force faces to show their hands. Would you have done that? Go public? Would you risk everything to get the judge out of the room? The reporter called within 48 hours. "We have a source that says Judge Pierce's wife, Lisa, had a relationship with your husband," she said. "We also have records of transfers from David's company to Lisa's accounts. Would you talk on the record?" That was moment 3 where the plan looked like it would explode. Publicity could backfire. It could sully my name, and the court could treat it as harassment. Margaret agreed reluctantly. "We go public with the paperwork. We don't make accusations we can't prove. We show the trail and we ask for recusal." The day the article dropped, David finally lost the cool veneer. He called me in the hallway of our house, voice shaking for once, though still trying to control the story. "You put this out," he accused. "I did," I said, "because you told me you'd take everything by Christmas, and I decided not to let you." He laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. You really think a paper can beat a judge? You think the public matters in family court? You think Margaret Chen can make the law work like a hero flick? You're in for a surprise, I said, because I'd become this person who didn't enjoy breaking people, but enjoyed truth. At the first hearing, Judge Pierce sat in a black robe I once admired on television. He looked like a man who'd never been pressed with real questions. Margaret stood and spoke plainly. Your Honor, we move to recuse based on undisclosed marital relationship to a party with whom your spouse has had financial interactions potentially implicated in this case. Pierce's jaw tightened. I'm not aware of any such relationship that would merit recusal, he said. I have disclosed all necessary information in my judicial disclosure form. Margaret slid a stack of documents across the bench. Those forms, Your Honor, are public record. She read into the microphone the filings we'd pulled. Campaign donations, consultancies, the Delaware LLC set up the week after one of our clients' closed-door vacations in Aspen. She read the timestamps and emails from Lisa to David, where she'd written, "He'll never figure it out." She laid out the bank transfers, and then, like a blade, she said, Lisa Pierce is Judge Pierce's wife. The courtroom murmured. I saw David's face pale, saw the smugness slide off in one piece and clatter to the floor. He mouthed something. I'm going to take you for everything you've got, but it sounded feral and thin. You want me to recuse because my wife is involved? The judge said, furious. Yes, Your Honor, Margaret answered. And we believe there's been an exchange of favors. At minimum, this is an appearance of impropriety. At maximum, it's a violation of judicial ethics. There was a sequence of events I hadn't anticipated. Pierce's first response was denial, then venom, then panic. He asked for time. He asked for an internal investigation. He posted a statement through the court's PR office that said, any suggestion of impropriety is categorically false. I will fully cooperate. But copies had already been requested by the Judicial Conduct Commission, and his campaign account's strange wire had been flagged by a nonprofit tracking judicial ethics. David's smugness turned to a kind of pale animal terror. You set me up, he told me outside the courthouse, the trash cans like silent witnesses. You'll ruin both of us. Did you ever love me? I asked. It was not rhetorical. He spat. I loved the idea of you. Do any of you have an answer for that? Have you ever been told you were a placeholder for an idea? The press circled all over Seattle, on social channels. Screenshots of the 47 recovered messages began to spread. I have the screenshots if you don't believe me, Margaret said, and the legal community started watching. The judge's colleagues muttered about ethical hand grenades, and mercifully, the chief judge ordered an immediate recusal pending investigation. That was when the real game began, because recusal didn't end the problem. It opened it. With Judge Pierce out, the case landed with a senior judge who had no appetite for games. Margaret requested a special master and an audit of all financial disclosures in the past 5 years. David retaliated. He filed for emergency temporary orders to limit my access to bank accounts and demanded custody of the dog. He also accused me of being vengeful and vindictive in filings that read like fiction. You're too emotional for this, he told the domestic relations magistrate. I did everything I could to protect our lives. Do you remember telling me you'd sip champagne in Tuscany with my money? I asked him in one deposition, recorded, and played back in a hearing. The audio had a clarity that was merciless. That's taken out of context, he said, and his voice cracked because he didn't have the narrative control anymore. We found more. The forensic accountant discovered an offshore trust in the Cayman Islands that had a shell company name, Meridian Consultants. Meridian had received a large wire 2 weeks after David had signed a deal for consultancy services with Lisa's LLC. The money had been traced to a Caribbean trust associated with a trust attorney who, interestingly, had previously been a donor to Judge Pierce's campaigns. These connections were knots. You could see them from orbit if you wanted to. That's a lot of lawyers and accountants, my mother said when I explained. Are you sure you want to drag their names forward? Some things should be dragged, I said. Some things should be asked in daylight. Another jeopardy point came when a key witness, Lisa herself, went missing. She stopped returning calls. Her social media went dark. For 2 weeks, no one knew where she was. Had she fled to avoid testimony? Had she arranged to have my evidence disappear? I panicked. This was the point where it felt like the whole thing could collapse. But then a woman in a coffee shop recognized Lisa from a photo and sent a DM. "Saw this woman at a clinic in downtown Seattle," she wrote. "She looked like she was hiding. If you want, I can ask." We tracked Lisa to a care facility where she claimed she was stressed and taking some space. She finally agreed to talk, and the timestamps on her statements matched the bank records we already had. She was vulnerable. She wanted to protect herself, but she couldn't lie around money for long. On the day the special master presented the interim report, the courtroom felt like an arena. Margaret stood and outlined the flow of money, the deceptive invoices, and the emails. She read Lisa's text messages where she and David plotted how to recharacterize transfers as loans and gifts to circumnavigate the prenup. She read a message that said, "If it comes to court, we'll say it was support. By Christmas, he'll be laughing." David looked like he might faint. His lawyer whispered into his ear. He tried to smile. It was a reflex. "According to this disclosure," the special master said, pointing to a collection of documents, "your current reported net worth is—" He paused, and that pause felt like the exact sound of glass breaking. "Zero," he said. "Zero," repeated Margaret, quiet like a verdict. The word hung in the air, like a death sentence. It wasn't literal. The documents showed he'd shifted assets into trusts, into foreign entities. Into Lisa's name, into companies set up by shells. He had tried to make himself insolvent on paper while still enjoying the lifestyle. It was a fraud, and the court smelled it. In the weeks that followed, motions flew, subpoenas were served, and a federal grand jury took interest. The Judicial Conduct Commission opened an inquiry into Judge Pierce. The local news ran segments that dissected the money trail. David's company's stock price dipped as investors worried about governance. Suppliers started calling in favors. Friends who had once sat at our kitchen table stopped returning my messages. "You're ruining him," one of his old friends said to me on the phone, voice low. "Some people think you're vindictive." "Tell me I'm crazy for what I did next," I said to my sister over wine. "Was I wrong to push? Do you think he would have stopped?" she asked. "Look at the messages. Look at the transfers. He planned it." There was a moment when I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted. The legal fees had emptied an account that technically belonged to both of us. I had to sell a painting to keep Margaret on retainer. I slept badly. Anyone who's been through divorce knows that the process is its own slow violence. But then, the justice system did something it rarely does in private matters. It acted in public view. The Judicial Commission subpoenaed Judge Pierce's electronic calendar, and once the calendar matched the ring footage timestamps, the Commission's investigators had a rope to pull. Pierce's defense was still defiant. "No impropriety," he said on the stand. "My wife and I have been married 20 years. I would never do anything to compromise my office. What would you have done in my shoes?" I asked viewers in one of those long court-adjacent interviews that local stations love. Would you have let a man with that kind of arrogance continue uninterrupted? Would you have let the system swallow you? The grand jury returned an indictment for wire fraud on the parties who ran the Shell network. It wasn't just a marital scandal anymore. It was a criminal investigation into the coordinated siphoning of corporate funds. David's legal team scrambled to make plea deals. Some of the consultants implicated cut plea bargains. Lisa, who'd been a hesitant participant, began cooperating when her exposures started to threaten criminal culpability. When the final hearing came and the special master presented the full audit, the judge, not Pierce, but the newly assigned federal judge, looked at David with a kind of disappointment that felt colder than anger. "Mr. Ellis," the judge said, using a name that had become shorthand for the situation. Your attempts to conceal assets and your misrepresentations to this court constitute an abuse of process. David's face crumpled. I'm not guilty, he insisted, like a child caught with a cookie jar. It is the court's decision that the marital estate will include all trace transfers, the judge continued. Assets held in trusts under beneficial interest of Mr. Ellis will be considered marital if they were funded during the marriage and for the marital benefit. Custody of the dog will remain with Miss Ellis. Temporary support will be awarded. You could feel the air change in the room. That was the first real public defeat for David. For those who've read about court dramas before, there were other layers: contempt motions, threats of appeals, days where the bank refused to release funds. But the essential revenge was legal and precise. The very plan David had relied on, using secrecy, hidden transfers, and a presumed favor from a judge, had collapsed because I forced daylight on it. The aftermath was messy and satisfying in ways I didn't expect. David's company suffered reputational damage. A tranche of investors called for an independent board review. The board hired outside counsel. Some partners left. David was forced to resign as CEO. His title evaporated faster than the champagne he'd expected to sip in Tuscany. Judge Pierce resigned from the bench under the weight of the commission's inquiry. The Judicial Integrity Report, when it finally came out, said plainly, Judge Pierce failed to disclose material facts and allowed personal relationships to create the appearance of impropriety. He paid fines and faced a professional derooting that made his name a cautionary tale in legal circles. Lisa, who had been at the center, lost her social standing. She moved out of Bellevue and started over in a smaller apartment in Capitol Hill. Sometimes I saw her across a farmer's market and almost said hello. Instead, I bought bread and watched her walk away. She was part of the mechanism and also a casualty of it. What did I get? Materially, I got what was fair. The court granted me an equitable share of assets, and the special master's audit returned funds into the marital estate that were then divided. I kept a modest condominium in Seattle and the painting I'd been reluctant to sell, which I later sold for half the listed price to cover fees, which I did not regret. I met someone months later, not a hero, just someone who liked my laugh and didn't have a secret bank account. He was a patent attorney named Stephen, who once said, "A man who can orchestrate something that sophisticated is never really broke, he's just creatively liquid." He made me laugh, and then reminded me that laughter is an underrated currency. This story is not a fairy tale. It involved nights of crying in the car. It had friends who chose him, not me, and colleagues who whispered. Some people said I went too far when I went public. Others said, I didn't go far enough. Tell me, would you have done what I did? Was I wrong to drag their names into the light? The lesson I have, and I don't want to be preachy about it, is that arrogance breeds blind spots. David assumed rules were malleable because he thought he had the right connections. He thought he'd won by building a private universe. He didn't realize I had an insistence for fairness that wasn't dramatic or loud. It was stubborn and patient. He also underestimated one other modern thing: technology. Ring footage, cloud backups, GPS logs, Venmo screenshots. Our lives are littered with receipts. The more you try to hide in a digital age, the more paper trail you create. Would you have believed you could beat a system that way? Have you ever been gaslit by someone you loved? Has anyone you know been betrayed with that level of audacity? What would you have done differently? Some people will read this and say I was vengeful. Maybe. Others will say I was practical. In court, justice rarely looks like cinematic revenge. It looks like paperwork, subpoenas, and relentless, boring persistence. It looks like hiring the right people, being willing to be uncomfortable, and pushing until the system responds. There were windfalls of moral victory too. Margaret told me once, you didn't just win money. You broke a loop where people assumed power could buy silence. That is true. People who'd sit in waiting rooms at the courthouse now felt less invisible. For every person who emailed me, thanking me for exposing the judge, There was another who asked if the system could protect them. I still have the screenshots. I still have the transcripts. The court documents are public record. You can look them up if you want. The security footage doesn't lie. I have doubts. Sometimes I wake up and remember his voice saying, "You're too stupid to even see what's coming," and I laugh because the joke landed on him, not me. Other times I grieve what we were before the deception. Would you have done what I did? Would you have gone public? Would you have hired a private investigator? Would you have sold the painting to pay for legal fees? Drop your answer in the comments. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Tell me, was I wrong or did I finally get the justice I deserved? Some people think I went too far. What do you think? If you want to hear more real stories where people face down injustice and sometimes win, subscribe and hit that bell. I've got dozens more like this. People who used patience, proof, and a little bit of rage to make sure the arrogant get their comeuppance.